This tutorial is for general chemistry students on how to write a lab report. So let's start with an example. Here is an example of a lab that you might be given in class. So notice that this packet that I'm going to hand to you has a title, so it tells you the name of the lab. I've given you a purpose or an objective, so what I want you to accomplish during the lab. In this case, I gave you a list of skills that you will be learning, so things that you will learn how to do while doing the course of this lab, or things that you will reinforce. Hopefully you already know how to do these things a little bit, and you will just be applying those skills to this lab. In this case, I gave you a reaction or an equation for a reaction. I will not always do this. Sometimes I will make you write or come up with the equation, but in this case, I just gave it to you. There's a list of materials. Sometimes that list of materials are a list of materials that you will need, and sometimes it's a list that you can use, meaning you won't necessarily use all of these materials, but here's the materials you can choose from, so you'll have to cull it down to the ones you actually used. And then a lot of times in my labs, I will actually give you a full-out procedure. So you will just follow the steps. You'll want to read through it before you do the lab, and then you will just do it step by step, like instructions. Now, sometimes I won't give you a procedure. Sometimes you will be asked to design your own procedure. So instead of writing a procedure here, I will write guidelines. And in that case, what these will be suggestions, but not an actual procedure, because you're going to be writing your own. And I'll get to that when I get there. Okay, and then on the back, you will find instructions on how to write your lab report. Now, your lab reports need to be completed on a separate sheet of paper, on your own sheet of lined paper. And it needs to be written very clearly. It can be typed if you don't like your handwriting, and I need you to take pride in the work that you turn in. Remember that you get what you give, and so if you are going to write something floppy and unorganized, then that will be reflected in your grade. So this is supposed to kind of help you write it in a particular order in a way that will make sense and will flow and will be easy for me to grade. All right, so every lab will come with something like this, so it'll be guidelines. And you'll start to notice that you're doing kind of the same things over and over in every lab, but I will always give you something like this so that you can make sure that you get a complete lab report that includes everything I want you to include. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the title. So before we get into writing the lab report, actually, it should be said that I will not accept a lab report that's written on this paper. So if you try to cram all of these in, just right next to here, and then you start writing stuff down in here, I'm not even going to look at it. So if that's what you're handing in, you are going to get exactly 0 points. Just so that you're very clear, I will only grade a lab report that is handed in your handwriting on a separate sheet of paper organized like this. And it should also be said that while you're doing the lab, it's fine to write stuff on this paper. So if you need to take notes, or if down here you want to write your data that's not very organized, just to keep track of what you're doing, and then you can take all of that and organize it into your lab report later. So it's always good to take notes during the course of the lab that you could then use to write your lab report. Okay, so title your lab report. It says to write a descriptive title. Most of the time I will actually give you a title. So this particular lab, I gave you a title at the very beginning, the stoichiometry of sodium acetate lab. So feel free to use that as the title of your lab report. You want to make sure that you also write your name, the date, and the period in the upper right-hand corner so that I know who this belongs to and I can give you your points. Purpose. The purpose is a statement that tells me what it is you were trying to accomplish. So there's your purpose statement. And again, I often will actually give you the purpose or objective, so you can feel free to just copy it over, or you can write it in your own words. I prefer writing in your own words just because then I know what you're talking about. All right, materials, a list of materials. So I want you to only write down the materials that you actually used during the course of the lab. So if I didn't actually give you a list of materials, you'll have to figure out what it was you used. But in this case, I actually gave you a list of materials, and so I just copied that over here. Procedure. Now, here's the thing. In this lab, I gave you a procedure. Notice the procedure is written in third-person statements, meaning that they are not saying what I would do. They're me telling you what to do. They're instructions. I don't expect you to copy that over onto here. But if you designed the lab and you had to come up with your own procedure, then you would have to copy the procedure in this space. And I want to make it perfectly clear that when you write a procedure, your procedure should always be, or should never be actually, in first person. Okay, so don't write your procedure, number 1, I got 15 grams of this. Number 2, I measured out blah, blah, blah. I mixed blah, blah, blah. It should never be like that. It should always be written as instructions for somebody else. And they should always be numbered. So short numbered steps so that they're really easy to follow, because you're trying to write them so someone else could do your lab. All right, data presentation. So up here it says data presentation. Show a data table with title, labeled columns, and units. Now, your data presentation is often going to be a data table, but sometimes it'll be a graph. And I will tell you what I want. And here I want a data table. So you're going to have to figure out how you want to organize your data, which you probably wrote down on the other lab sheet as you went, and now you're going to have to organize it into into a data table. In this case, I decided on 2 data tables. Notice I used a straight edge to outline the data table. I have titles for my data tables. I have columns and I have rows going across, and I have labels so I know what everything means, and units on my numbers. Okay. And so data analysis. So where it says data analysis, I've actually told you what I want. So for data analysis and calculations for this lab, I wanted a balanced chemical equation, so there it is. I wanted you to clearly show how you calculated the theoretical mass of baking soda, so there's that calculation. And notice that I showed the whole calculation with units there, and it was nice and clean, and I know exactly how you got this number. And then percent yield, and there's the percent yield calculation. So it's nice and orderly, and I can tell exactly what you've done. Discussion of error, conclusion. I don't know where conclusion went. So there should be, there should be a conclusion statement. Okay, your conclusion statement should be a statement that indicates what your conclusions were. So you had an objective, so hopefully you met that objective, and then you can write a statement that explains to me what your result was, or were. So here, my conclusion statement says that you reacted 5.12 grams of sodium bicarbonate with excess vinegar, and you produced 5.6 grams of sodium acetate. And you also put the percent yield, which we calculated up here. So it's really just a quick little statement that tells me what your results were in a sentence. Make sure that you use your data and not someone else's, so these numbers need to match your data. All right, and last but not least, there should be a discussion of error, because all labs are going to have, all experiments are going to have some amount of error introduced into them. I mean, mistakes will be made, equipment's not perfect, so you are not going to get a perfect outcome. So to discuss your error, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to calculate something called a percent error. And I will go over how to make these calculations in class, so don't panic right now. So you're going to calculate a percent error. The percent error tells me how close I was to what I should have gotten. So you were trying to make 5 grams. In this lab, you're trying to make 5 grams of a product, but you made 5.6 grams, so your percent error is 12%. You are 12% wrong. You have made an error somewhere in there. You've messed up, and you're 12% off of what you should have gotten. So you're going to calculate your percent error in this lab, right? And then you're going to write a statement that indicates the sources of your uncontrolled error. And by uncontrolled, I mean it wasn't you being sloppy. It wasn't you not measuring correctly. It wasn't you making mistakes that you could easily have remedied. You need to make sure you're as thorough and as careful as possible. So your error should be based more on things that you really couldn't control. So there's a statement of error, and a lot of times that will be based on your equipment. Is your equipment malfunctioning or maybe not doing what it's supposed to be doing? And then, of course, the last thing I'm going to ask for you in a lab report is writing a statement that indicates what changes you would take or what steps you would take to get a better result, right? So instead of 12% error, we really want 0%, so what could you have done? And so there's a statement right here that indicates this is what I would change if I were going to do it again to try to minimize my error. So that's how you write a formal lab report. You will staple it together. If you feel like you want to include this with it, you can, but I don't normally want this. I'm not going to grade anything that you wrote on this. So you would staple in the corner right here, and you would hand it into the basket.